Hi, good day everyone. So since you've already here in my channel, I've already assumed that you've already checked your e-class for your subject ethics, and aside from that, you've already checked the lesson, downloaded the lesson, and read the rules and regulation and watch some video that I've attached. So today, we will discuss now the first lesson of ethics, which entitled The Fundamentals of Ethics. So let's start with the origin of ethics, or where does ethics come from, or saan ba nagsimula lahat, or why there is so-called word ethics. Ethics basically comes from the Greek word ethos, means character, customs, or habit. Ethics started in ancient Greece was concerned with the development, which basically concerned with the development of the virtues and moral character. One of the person that started ethics is, of course, Mr. Socrates. Socrates first recognized the value of questions that affect how person should alive, and of course, Socrates also has this so-called certain discoveries that he entitled as a Socratic method, consists of asking people questions about ideas they presumably know about. So that was the origin of ethics. Saan nanggaling? Where does it takes place first? And since we've already know the origin of ethics, let's proceed now to defining what is ethics. When we say ethics, it is also often called moral philosophy. When we say moral philosophy, it is actually the rational study of the meaning and justification of moral claim. When we say moral claims, it is claim that evaluates the rightness or wrongness of an action or a person's character. Moral philosophy is usually divided into three distinct subject areas. So, to simplify its definition, when we say moral philosophy, it is a branch of philosophy that contemplates what is right and wrong. And when we say moral, when we say the word moral, it is come from Latin word mors, which also means customs and habits. Ethics also defined as the study of methods and principles used to distinguish a good from bad, as I've said, and right from wrong action. And that means that ethics is the science of customs or habits in society. But take note, guys, or class, that ethics is also the science of highest good. It is the science of morality. And aside from that, it actually said that ethics is not an art, because art consists in the acquisition of skill, but morally consists in an attitude of the will when there is no overaction. When ethics is a science because it aims at systematic explanation of the rightness and wrongness behavior. So always take note with that. When we say ethics, ethics is not an art, because art consists in the acquisition of a skill, but morality consists in an attitude, or ethics consists in an attitude or the will when there is no overt action. So that explains why ethics is a science, because it aims at systematic explanation of rightness and wrongness. So since we've already done discussing what is ethics or the definition of ethics, let's proceed to another slide. So ethics also has an assumption, or the assumption of ethics. Like any other discipline, ethics proceed from some basic assumption. Assumption are fundamentals, belief, or statement that are accepted to be true without burden of proving or proof. Most books concerning the study of ethics present a long list of assumptions, but this time I've already listed two important assumptions of ethics. So let's know first what is the importance of having this assumption of ethics. Literally, making a judgment, or the importance of it is in making a judgment about whether a person is morally responsible for her behavior and holding others and ourselves responsible for actions, and the consequences of actions is a fundamental and familiar part of our moral practices and our interpersonal relationships. So basically, assumption of ethics is very important on the interaction between yourself to the others, what are those responsibilities that you have every action that you made, and what are those moral practices that you have when you are in communicating and having a conversation with others. So let's try to look the two most important and the most common assumption of ethics. First, that man is a rational being. This means that man is rational in actions with purpose, unlike brutes who merely act out of instincts and reflex. Second, that man is free. Yes, ethics assumes that man is free to act according to his will, and he has the power to act, speak, or think if he chooses to restrain. So that was the assumption of ethics, the two most important and most common assumption of ethics. Just to add, when we say assumption, it is something that you assume to be case even without a proof. For example, people might make the assumption that you are a nerd if you wear glasses, even though that is not true. That is actually the example of assumption. So let's proceed to the next slide. So if there's an assumption of ethics, of course there's an object of ethics. The principal cause of action is usually attributed to the doer. If, for the instance, Pedro and not any malicious demon or spirit is responsible for his act or for the crime he committed, because Pedro did the act, it is expected that Pedro suffer the moral or legal consequences of his act. So basically, it is an example of the object of ethics. Let's know the two important type of ethics that actually explains the example with the first slide. So let's discuss first what is physical ethics. When we say the physical object of ethics, it is the doer of an act and the act done by the doer are two different objects of ethics. The doer of an act is the physical object of ethics, or also called as a moral agent. Physical object of ethics does not only refer to a person but to an institution. For example, business, firm, the government, and the other forms of social organization, non-governmental organization, clubs, fraternity, and association. When we say physical object of ethics, it is actually not only concerned with the person itself, but also to the other or to the entire persons that involved in that situation. For example, in the certain government, in a certain business, or in a firm, or what are those socialization that you've actually those social organization that you have actually been entered, or who are those persons that you have actually been socialized. So that was the physical object of ethics. But it's very contradict to the another object of ethics, which is non-physical object of ethics. Why? When we say non-physical, it is the action done by the moral agent. When we say physical, it is the moral agent, or aside from from a person or referring to a person, it is also can be an institution. But a non-physically object of ethics, when we say non-physical, so it's literally defining the action done by the moral agent, such as the act of telling the truth, helping others in distress, fulfilling a promise, forgiving others' trespasses, humility, including malicious deeds such as a murder, stealing, lying, and others are called non-physical object of ethics. So please take note with the differences between physical object and non-physical object. When we say physical object, it is the moral agent, not only the person but also includes the institution. Aside from physical object, when we say non-physical object, it is when it describes actually the word non-physical. By the word non-physical, it is defined as the action done by the person or either in the institution. So that was the object of ethics. That was the two types of object of ethics. Let's proceed our discussion to two general forms of act. So there are two general forms of act. Let's discuss first the acts of man. Acts of man has two types also: involuntary natural acts and voluntary natural and voluntary natural acts. So let's begin with involuntary natural acts. These are the acts of man, or two types. First type is involuntary, as I've said. This includes the involuntary, intuitive, or reflex acts exhibited by man, such as blinking of the eye, beating of the heart, sneezing, yawning, breathing, scratching, and others. That is the involuntary natural acts of man. Always remember that involuntary natural acts involve, or the example of it is blinking, beating of the heart, sneezing, yawning, breathing, or scratching, and others. And it is very different with another natural act, because when we say voluntary act, there are actually examples or activities that can we eventually do in an involuntary act. So try doing the following and confirm for yourself if they're indeed voluntary. Stop blinking for 5 to 10 minutes. Stop breathing for 5 to 10 minutes. Stop your heart from breathing. And stop your stomach from digesting the food you have taken during breakfast. So after you've listened or watched this pre-recorded video, can you please do these activities, and afterwards send me your feedback by direct message in a messenger, and I will be including that feedback to your quiz. So as I've said, it's very different. The two forms of acts is very different from involuntary and voluntary, kasi when we say involuntary, those acts are because when we say involuntary, this is actually done contrary to or without a choice. When we say voluntary act, it is actually done by your choice, or it is actually done because you need it, and you basically done it daily. Okay, as I've said, when we say voluntary natural acts, it is performed as part of your daily. So for example, these activities, socially learned activities, example, brushing our teeth, combing our hair, cutting our nails, taking a bath, and etc. As I've said, that it's very different, both acts. Why? Because in involuntary, this is done contrary to or without a choice. When I say voluntary, this is performed as part of our daily needs in life. And for example, when we say social learn activities, for example, brushing our teeth, combing our hair, cutting our nails, taking a bath, this is actually our basic needs. So it is voluntary. We can actually, or ginagamit natin siya or ginagawa natin siya voluntary, because this is the needs that we have. But when we say involuntary, it is a need that without a choice, or for example, it's not about without a choice, it's lumalabas lang siya sa'yo. Like for example, by breathing, that is actually a need. Breathing, beating, sneezing, yawning, that is actually a need of your body. So need your body, it is actually a need of your body, or let's say it is a reflex acts exhibit by a man or by a person. So that is an involuntary act. So let's proceed to our next slide. So you've already know what are those differences between involuntary and voluntary natural acts. So as I've said, do the activity, this one, do this, and confirm for yourself if there are indeed voluntary. And after that, send it to me as a feedback, and I will be including it on your quiz. So let's proceed to another slide. So aside from acts of man, which has two types, which are voluntary and involuntary, the second general forms of acts is human acts. When we say human, or include an action that are conscious, deliberate, intentional, voluntary, are within the preview of human value or judgment. Human acts are either moral or immoral. So there are classifications of human acts. First, the moral or ethical acts. These are humans acts that are observed or conform to standard or norm of morality. And also, when we say moral, it is an action involves taking the necessary steps to transform the intent to do a right thing into reality, or this includes moral ownership, moral efficacy, and moral courage. So basically, when we say moral, it tends to be the right thing into reality. So aside from moral, we also have the contradict one, immoral or unethical acts. When we say immoral or unethical acts, these are humans acts that violate or deviate from a standard of morality. So it is contradict why if we say moral, it is the right thing into reality. When we say immoral or unethical, these are those situation or those situation that you are acting or you are acting wrong acts. So as I've said, when we say moral, this is the right thing of the reality. When we say immoral, these are those acts that are wrong, or these are those activities that are wrong. When we say activity, it actually includes violence, like for example, murder, rape, lying, breaking promises. That is actually immoral or unethical acts. Aside from that, there are also forms of ethical analysis. When we say forms of ethical analysis, it includes descriptive ethics. When we say descriptive ethics, is more suited to empirical science like sociology, psychology, or political science at its aim to discover what moral beliefs are held by a given society or social group or social organization. To explain further, when we say descriptive ethics, these are the working ethics aimed to uncover people's belief about such a thing as values, which actions are right and wrong, and which characteristics of moral agents are virtues. So let's have some examples of descriptive ethics. It is wrong to kill people just because they make you angry. We should fight to free slaves when necessary, even when doing is illegal. So that was those situation that actually explains or examples of descriptive ethics. So next to descriptive ethics, we have normative ethics. When we say normative ethics, it is a study, not merely a description of what people find morally good. Many part of philosophers believe that ethics is the most part, or it is a normative study. Or for further explanation or to simplify the definition, when we say normative ethics, these are the branch of moral philosophy that concern with the criteria of what is morally right and wrong. When we say it is the criteria of what is morally right and wrong, it is basically includes the formulation of moral rules that have direct implication for what women actions, institutions, and ways of life should be like. So that was the normative ethics. One of the example of normative ethics is the golden rule. Golden rule is a classic example of a normative principle that stated we should do to others what we would want others to do to us. So this is one of the golden rule that is basically an example of normative principle. Since I do not want my neighbor to steal my car, then it is wrong for me to steal her car. So basically, that golden rule define this certain example that since I do not want my neighbor to steal my car, then it is wrong for me to steal her car. So that is the example of normative ethics. So since we've already done defining the two forms of ethical analysis, let's take up with this question. What are the difference of descriptive ethics and normative ethics? Basically, the main difference between normative ethics and descriptive ethics is that normative ethics, take note with this, normative ethics analyze how people ought to act, whereas descriptive ethics analyze what people think is right. Okay? When we say normative, it analyzes how people ought to act, whereas descriptive ethics analyze what people think is right. So that was the difference between the two. So let's proceed to the next slide. So major normative ethics and the consequentialist or theological ethics, and non-consequentialist or deontological ethics. So let's discuss first what is consequentialist. When we say consequentialist or theological ethics, this is school of thought maintains that the morality of an action is determined slowly by its consequences, or literally, whether an act is right or wrong, it depends only on the result of that act. So that is consequentialist ethics. The more good consequences an act produces, the better or more right that act. So that basically explains what is consequentialist ethics from the word consequentialist, consequences. It depends what are those. It depends on the situation that you are in. For example, if you're doing right or wrong, it depends on the consequences that is being preferred. If you do right or if you do wrong. But the result of an act is the more good consequences an act produces, the better or more right that act. So always remember that. Example of an consequentialist is of an consequences is utilitarianism. When we say utilitarianism, it is those individuals that deciding what to do for themselves alone. So they considered only their own utility. For example, if you're choosing ice cream for yourself, that is an example of utilitarian view. So that is basically the meaning of utilitarianism. So let's proceed to non-consequentialist or the deontological ethics. When we say deontological theories, it asserts that the morality of an action depends on its intrinsic nature, its motives, or its accordance with so rules or principles, and not its consequences. Example is Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative. Or, to simplify the definition, when we say non-consequentialism or non-consequentialist, it is basically the theory which denies that the rightness or wrongness of our conduct is determined solely by the goodness or badness of the consequences or of our acts or the rules to which those acts conform. So, what are those examples of non-consequentialism? For example, some of Raw's prima facie or duties or non-injury and beneficence, for instance, are directly related to promoting good consequences or minimizing bad ones, but others or fidelity, gratitude, and justice are not. So that was the one of the example of non-consequentialism. So the differences between consequentialist and non-consequentialist is that a consequentialist theory of a value judges the rightness or wrongness of an action based on the consequence that action has. So when we say consequentialist, it is judged with the rightness or wrongness of an action based of the consequence in itself. But when we say non-consequentialist, it is the theory that value judges the rightness or wrongness of an action based on the properties of intrinsic to the action, not on its consequences. So basically, it's not depends on what is the consequential should be. It is actually depends on the rightness or wrongness of your action. It is very contradict or kabaliktaran with the consequences kasi with the consequentialist ethics. Why? Because in consequentialist ethics, it focuses on the consequences. When we say non-consequentialist, it focuses on your doing or your action, if it is right or wrong. So that was the major normative ethics. So let's proceed to another slide. Another form of ethical analysis. So when we say there are two ethical analysis, three, yes, there are three. For example, one is authoritarian ethics, second is theological ethics, and third is legalistic morality. So let's start with authoritarian ethics. When we say authoritarian ethics, these are the theory of morality that appeals to authority and force in determining what constitute right from wrong, good from bad, and moral from immoral. So from the word authoritarian, it's actually self-explanatory. From the word authoritarian, it focuses on the authority, or you are being forced to determine what constitutes right from wrong, and good from bad, or moral from immoral. So for example, Mark is wondering if adultery is an immoral act. So that is one of the example of authoritarian ethic. Mark here is being forced to determine if the doing is wrong or good from bad, or moral from immoral. Let's proceed to another ethics. We have theological ethics. So this holds that the will of God is what determines the rightness and wrongness of an act. So from the word itself, theological, it is regarding to the situation, or it's regarding on determining God with the rightness and wrongness of an act. So it's very self-explanatory again. So when we say theological, it is pertaining to God to determine if your doing is right or wrong. So next to theological ethics, we have legalism or legistic morality. From the word itself, legalism, it determines right from wrong based on a body of clearly stated and well-documented body of laws. So, remember that one. When we say legalism, basically, it defines the well-documented body of laws or a certain rule and regulation that being well implemented in a certain country or a certain society. So that is legalism or legistic morality. Next slide, we have ethical egoism. It maintains that an action is right only if it is in the interest of the agent of the doer of the act. So ethical egoism is not simply theory of morality. Or basically, to simplify it, when we say ethical egoism, the moral or the doer or the moral agent itself oath to act in their own self-interest. It is ethical egoism. So what are those examples of ethical egoism? Let's try to look with this. Let's try to define this statement. Jack believes that Jill should promote her own interests in accordance with ethical egoism. Jack might believe this, but he isn't going to tell Jill. He looks to his own interests first. So basically, when we say ethical egoism, it is pertaining to your act with your own self-interest. You are not actually socializing with the others. You are not having the so-called word concern with the others, because you will eventually always choose your self-interest. So that is ethical egoism. So next one is situational ethics. When we say situational ethics, it asserts that the morality of an action depends on the situation and not the application of moral laws to the case. So that is situational. From the word situational, it is the morality itself is depending on the situation, not by the laws that implemented, not by yourself only, but depending on the situation itself. So let's proceed to the next slide. The forms of ethics again. We have practical ethics, theoretical ethics, and moral skepticism. So let's try to define first what is practical ethics. It is a primarily concerned with answering matter-of-fact questions, such as the question posed by the situation presented above. It is essential normative, that is, it prescribes courses of action for moral issue where clear answers are lacking. Or to simplify, when we say practical ethic, it has provide for resolving or at least accommodating such as disagreement. It is not simply matter of choosing particular. So that was the practical ethics. For example, benefiting others could be said to be an area of human life, whereas a principle of beneficence is usually seen as a part of moral theory. The same goes for promising, receiving gifts, and making claim on others. So that was the practical ethics. It is the principle of resolving or at least accommodating such a disagreement. So that is practical ethics. Let's go to another ethics. We have theoretical ethics. When we say theoretical ethics, it is primarily aims to study the meaning of ethical concepts such as good, right, and fairness. Attempts to study of moral acts inquires into what makes a right and determines the relation between facts and values. It's very contradictory. It's very different with the practical, because practical seems to be the principle for resolving, but for the theoretical ethics, it's basically the ethics that attempts to study moral acts, or all the moral acts is here in theoretical ethics. It produces a fairness to everyone, or it produces a concept as good, right, and fairness to everyone. It balances the ethics to money, as you can see with the picture. So more on ethics before the so-called money. So that is actually theoretical ethics. Next to theoretical ethics, we have moral skepticism. When we say moral skepticism, comes from the Greek word skeptestia, meaning to examine or to consider. It is generally named for the philosophic attitude that rejects any claim to certainly thus opposed to any form of moral dogmatism or to any attitude of authoritative certainty. Or, to simplify its definition, when we say moral skepticism, it is the names of diverse collection of views that deny or raise doubts about various rules of reason in morality. So, for example, of a moral skepticism, it is actually claimed that there simply are no moral facts. So that was the example of moral skepticism. Claim that there is simply no moral facts. So that was the view of moral skepticism. Or aside from that, the ethics of war, that is actually one of the example also of moral skepticism. So let's proceed to another slide. We have personal and social ethics. Personal ethics tries to study how a person should act in relation, or how a person should act in relation to himself. And when we say social ethics, it concerns how a person should act in relation to others. Such a distinction rests on the differentiating between oneself and duties to others. So personal acts ethics, it actually start on yourself, or the actions start with the person itself. And when we say social ethics, it is actually the act now that in relation to others. You're basically having a socialize with others, and between to oneself and duties to others. So that was the difference between personal ethics and social ethics. So that was the end of our discussion for this morning. Thank you very much for listening. If you did not understand the discussion, you can repeat it again and again until you've already understand the point. So, but before we end this, okay, let's end our discussion with a quote. Ethics is knowing the difference between what you have a right to do and what is right to do. So thank you very much for listening again. And before we go, let's have an activity. So now, since tomorrow is holiday, let's have an oral virtual drill. So I pick some students randomly to discuss and to share thoughts and ideas about certain topic. So please take note with this. So the first one to share her thoughts and ideas with this certain topic is Miss Abigail Bedro. So Miss Abigail, the topic would be the meaning of work and the history of work. Again, Miss Abigail, your topic is the meaning of work and the history of work. Next to Abigail, we have Princess Kamaruden. For Princess Kamaruden, we have perception of work. Next to Princess, we have Salasal Bailani. Her topic would be factors that affect work. Next to Bailani, we have Baby Pagayaw. So, Baby, your topic would be interest, work, and working. Again, Baby, your topic would be interest, work, and working. Lastly, the next one would be Abdul Siti Haina. For Siti Haina, your topic would be personality, types of individuals, and workers. Again, for Siti Haina, your topic would be personality, types of individuals, and workers. And lastly, we have Faiza Dalandas or Athena. Your topic would be All Holland Self-Assessment test. So that would be our oral virtual drill that we will be doing on Wednesday. Wednesday, to be exact, July 21. So, Abigail Bedro, you will be the one to share a link. Ikaw mismo ang bibigay ng link sa amin para ma-add mo kaming lahat. And everyone, every person that I've already mentioned in this virtual drill, prepare your PPT questions after your OVD or your question after your oral virtual drill. Don't worry, kayo lang yung nauna, but all of you will be having a drill. So again, Bedro Abigail, your topic, the meaning of work and the history of work. Camaruden Princess, your topic, perception of work. Salasal by Lani, your topic, factors that affect work. Pagayaw Baby, your topic, interest, work, and working. Abdul Siti Haina, your topic, personality, types of individuals and workers. Dalandas Faiza, your topic, whole and self-assessment test. So, again, I pick person randomly. I did not pick it with pagkasunod-sunod, randomly pag-pick nito. So, thank you very much for your listening to that again. So, if you did not understand the topic, you can recall it again and again in my YT channel. And if you have inquiries and questions, you can direct message me. Thank you everyone and stay safe. Always, please don't forget your oral virtual drill by Wednesday. Miss Bedro, Camaruden, Salasal, Pagayaw, Abdul, and Dalandas. Thank you very much.